Hi, we're going to talk today a little bit about how we can unlock the power of the diaphragm for great voice and communication. We'll talk a little bit today about deep breathing. What is deep breathing? Why is deep breathing necessary for a speaker or a performer? And then I'm going to give you one exercise that can help you start to recognize deep breathing. Another word for breathing is to inspire, to take breath in, right? And technically you have the exhalation or the expiration of the breath. You have a lot of breathing muscles, and at the base of your rib cage you have this thing called the diaphragm. It's a really big muscle. You can see it here. It crosses the entire abdomen. That muscle is connected to the ribs, to the spine. All the major breathing muscles of your body are actually connected to the skeletal system in some way, which is why we as performers and speakers like to address alignment and finding best alignment for each person to their particular body. Because when you can get your greatest alignment, you can have ease to the muscles that are meant to breathe. What happens if there's a major misalignment is that breathing muscles have to grip and serve too much as structural support muscles, and they lose their primary function as breathing muscles. That diaphragm acts like a vacuum, and every time a breath comes in, so the diaphragm drops down, it actually is like a vacuum. It draws air into the body. You technically don't have to inhale. That breath fills you. So the diaphragm drops down, and at the same time, you're going to notice on this little graphic, when the diaphragm drops down, the rib cage opens up and out. Do you see that? It doesn't just lift upwards, it goes up and out. So you can see that movement, that the diaphragm drops, the lungs fills. So the action of the breath is like this. There's a little cue in the rib cage. It starts to open just a tiny bit, which is because the lungs are housed in there. So the body knows breath is coming in. That diaphragm drops down like a vacuum. The air fills in and the ribs fill out, and then the same thing, boom. So you can see that on the graphic there, and you can watch the way that the breath moves in the body. In between your ribs there, you're going to see the intercostal muscles, and maybe we'll talk about them later, because there's a lot of exercises you can do to release those muscles so you can actually improve your breath capacity and have a flexibility to that part of the body that will allow for further breath capacity. A full breath cycle, you have a full breath cycle, that's going to entail the breath coming in and the breath going out. So we'd call it an inhalation and an exhalation. We'd call it to inspire and to expire. We would call it also, on the inhale would be like the incoming breath, the breath that fills you, and then the outgoing breath, the breath that leaves you. Those are the different ways we like to describe it in voice work. That word inspiration is so key, because when you inspire, inhale, incoming breath, you let the external world come into you. You receive what is external and you let it in. In other words, you listen, you receive. You are able to see on that incoming breath. You're giving yourself the time in communication to listen, to perceive, to see, to receive. And then on that exhalation, you're giving that internal you that's inside, boom, the breath comes in. It picks up the internal you and it sends it out into the world. That's the nature of your breath. So on the exhalation, you express yourself, you speak, you give, you let yourself be seen, whether you like it or not. That breath came in and it went out. On a technical level, right, you're taking in something new, which is oxygen, and then you're letting out something old, carbon dioxide. So that's the cycle of breath, and the physical, the scientific, teaches us something essentially metaphorical that the speaker and the actor can use. Great presence and great speech involves both. You can't just be a giver and a speaker, and you also can't just be a passive listener. You have to be in conversation. So even when you're public speaking, the greatest public speakers are not afraid to take time with their breath, to listen, to pause, to perceive. You'll notice great public speakers may actually have moments of silence in their speech. I'm not talking long, drawn-out silence, but moments where they allow themselves to see what's happening in the audience, to receive that feedback, to let it come in and change them, and then to respond accordingly. That's a power you could use as a public speaker, and it is profound. When you're looking at the diaphragm from the various perspectives, one of them, anatomical, that diaphragm separates the upper organs from the lower organs, so that when you use diaphragmatic breathing, you're connected to a feeling self. That diaphragm is dropping down and literally moving your guts, connecting to your guts, and then it's bringing it out of you. You don't have to push to feel. That's number one. Number two, though, is also really essential, and that's just the mechanics of the voice. So when you have breath that comes all the way down with this powerhouse and it comes out, boom, like this, you have more subglottic air pressure. Your glottis is your voice. And when you have the breath coming from diaphragmatic breathing, you support your voice with these abdominal muscles. The breath comes out very intuitively, but also with a level of control that allows sound to be carried further in the space you're in. The other essential element about the diaphragm is that it is this place where feeling happens. So when you're laughing, that's the diaphragm, right? That actually bounces off. So if you try to laugh now, you'll actually feel that the diaphragm is the muscle that is bouncing in there deep within you as the laugh is happening. The same thing, the diaphragm is responsible for crying and sobbing, and there's a huge mechanical thing that happens when we cry and breath comes in, and the diaphragm is letting breath out in an irregular way. So when you can start to feel that breath coming in, and then you can make the breath move in a different way, you can actually trigger an internal response in the body, which allows emotional release. So for an actor, sometimes you can use it to understand that a physical choice using the breath can make an emotional response. There's another really interesting fun fact about the diaphragm, and that is that you can pinpoint that muscle's involvement in emotion from how it responds in certain situations. So if you have ever laughed so hard, you said you got a cramp in your stomach, you had a side stitch, that's actually cramping of the diaphragmatic muscle, because that's how involved it is in emotional expression. It's wild to think. If you've also ever had the hiccups, that is a spasm of the diaphragm. When you go to public speak or to perform and nerves overcome you, you might feel that those internal breathing muscles are really contracted. They're not doing their job. They're tight, they're nervous, and the voice feels shallow. If you've ever tried to sing while nervous, you'll notice that the voice doesn't get the support it needs to really be the fully resonant voice. You can actually work with nerves and with the voice. So what happens with nerves is that our body gets in a pattern, and then we fight the pattern and we can't get out. So the next time you feel nervous before you have to speak or perform, acknowledge the feeling, live in it, abide in it, and just say hello to it, notice it, and you'll notice it might pass after about 90 seconds, a minute and a half. That feeling will pass. You don't have to fight it, it will go. So let's start to look at, with a basic exercise, how we can notice where breath is. In this little exercise I'm going to demonstrate here, you will see that I am just showing you a way to sit in a chair and to lean forward so that you can start to feel if breath is moving in certain places in the body. If you don't feel breath at all in these places, then there's work to be done with further exercises that you can do with a coach so that you can learn how to get that breath to drop. A lot of us, we got our breath to drop sometime at a point in our lives, in our work, in our performance work, and then all of a sudden we're disconnected from the breath again because something happens that makes us hold our breath in life. We're living through a time that makes us hold our breath. So I'm going to take you through a basic exercise to just notice where the breath is in your body. The practicality of getting our breath to drop. You could put hours in on the floor, lying and feeling your breath drop. There's a lot of exercises we can do. I want to start with something really simple, and that's sitting in a chair just like this. So go ahead now and sit in a chair. Take a moment. Go ahead, sit down, find a chair. I need you to sit in a chair where you feel solid enough that you can lean forward and put your elbows on your thighs. And in this position, I want you to be aware of where you feel your breath. Do you feel your breath in your back, in your belly? Do you feel your breath in your rib cage? What this posture allows you to do is to begin to feel the breath move in the belly, in the ribs, and the back. It's really helpful if you have a coach or a friend who can actually feel where it's moving. So I can do this here with myself. If I put my hand here, I can feel it's moving in my ribs. And you might even be able to see that if you come closer. So zoom in and look at my fingers and notice that as a breath comes in, you can see the move. That's my breath. Now I'm going to do the same thing here. I wonder as I'm leaning here if my breath can go to my back. I bet you can see that a little bit, that the breath and the fingers are moving. That's breath going to my sides and my back. And so now I'm going to focus just to see, it's not very glamorous, if my belly is expanding along my waistband. And I can feel it moving there. So now I know my breath is dropped. Here's the hard part. If I go to stand, can I feel it in all those same places? That's where you may need a coach, someone to help you feel that in the body, so that you can translate a feeling of deep breathing no matter what the position. If you're an athlete going to lift a weight, throw a ball, catch a ball. If you're someone getting up to give a public speaking address. If you're someone having to have a difficult, fierce conversation. Learning how to notice if your breath is deep, if it's in the belly, the back, the ribs. This is your quick little exercise. When you start to engage a deep breath, not only does it allow further range of the voice, resonance, and richness, it also allows you to connect to your feeling self. We would call that breath carrying out your thought feeling impulse, so that no matter what you do, you can't hide. Have you ever considered that you can really understand what someone is saying, even if their words are going contrary to what they're saying? Have you ever considered that someone could just breathe and you could know exactly what they're feeling? It's because your breath, it communicates your internal life, and here's how. The breath communicates the internal life. It doesn't even need your voice to reveal who you are. You read what people feel. They could tell you one thing with their words, and you know that their voice tone, their body language is saying something totally different. In acting, we call that subtext. And so that is one element of the power of the breath. Learning to get your breath to express your thought, feeling, impulse. When you use diaphragmatic breathing, you're connected to being able to express your thought, feeling, impulse, so that your words can really convey what you feel in the moment. You support your voice better, so you actually have more vocal power and range and resonance. And you have the power, by using this deep breathing, to come to terms with what it is to be present. So the next time you're in a situation, whether it be an audition or getting up to speak in front of people or walking into a room where you know you have to have a difficult conversation, take a moment to notice where your breath is before that moment. And then when you get into that moment, take the time to really let the breath in. Take the time to really speak your truth. And if for a moment you get scared, don't hesitate then to take a few breaths before you speak. You won't seem strange. You'll just seem present. And that's the power of beginning to engage deep breathing, diaphragmatic breath.